This meeting is being recorded.
All right, thank you all so much. Let me just share my screen real quick and we will get started. Can everybody see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So first off, I just want to thank you all for being here. We're all here, to learn a little bit more about 5G, what our network offers, and what, specifically what our build looks like in Richmond and, the processes that we go through. So, thank you all for being here. And, a special thank you to, Counselor Jordan and Sven for helping put this together, and Tim and the Fan Neighborhood Association for helping make this event happen. We're excited to join you all today and really excited to be a resource here to, learn a little bit more about 5G and answer your questions. So I'm going to kind of start off, my half of the presentation, really just talking about what is 5G? How did we get here? What is the technology about? What are some of the exciting things that are emerging from 5G technology? And then, James is going to kind of get more into the nuts and bolts of the matter of the permitting processes that we go through, some of the laws and, efforts that we've gone through in order to, all the years of work that have led up to our build of 5G, not only in Richmond, but nationwide as well. And then after the presentation, we'll be happy to take questions, answer them the best that we can. And if there's anything more specific about a specific site, for example, or a question that we may not be able to answer right off the bat, we're more than happy to take questions offline as well. We'll work with Sven to field whatever questions we can't get to tonight. Make sure we answer your questions offline. All right. I first wanted to start off here by just kind of demonstrating that, Verizon's a huge company, right? We're a Fortune 20 company. We have 150 some thousand employees globally, probably more than that now. And, we're a big company, but we're also a part of the community. James and I were both born and raised in Richmond. I'm coming to you now from our office on Gray Street. So I'm sitting in my office right here in Richmond, and I live in Manchester. So, I say that to show that, we're part of the Richmond community and we care about the community. And I wanted to, go over a couple of things that we do to help support our community, because at Verizon, part of our mission is to support and really give back to the communities that we serve. And we, do that in a lot of different ways, but one of ways I wanted to kind of go over here is through our Verizon Foundation and our local engagement grants. We have a strong effort within the company for volunteerism and giving back to the community. And in addition to my state,
hey Matt, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm not sure if you're in presentation mode. It might be easier for everyone to see because it's not showing on presentation mode.
That is strange. Okay. So,
and I believe it's also still on the first slide.
Huh. On my computer, I'm on the second slide. So let's see. I'm going to hit presentation mode, slideshow.
Well, that looks like it updated on our end, but it is still on the first slide.
Okay.
And I would just say, Matt and James, we know Verizon does a lot of wonderful things in the community. We have no doubt, and we realize you have a strong presence here locally. Just in the interest of your own time, because I know you're, also in session and juggling a lot. I think we were really just more curious about the background of the implementation, the permitting, the questions people had about, sidewalk repair, and the more specific, like street level issues of 5G. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was going to quickly get through all of this. What are you seeing now, slide wise?
The first screen, and then just your desktop with the screen view on the sides.
Yeah, still in work mode, not in presentation mode on our screen.
Okay. Well, I have no idea why, but am I on the second slide now?
Yes, you are.
You are still in work mode, but you're on the second slide.
Okay. Well, let me just do it from here then. Yeah, I apologize about that. I mean, I'm hitting presentation mode, but it's not working. Okay. Well, we'll just call a quick audible. Okay. So like Counselor Jordan said, I mean, I'll just quickly touch on, a couple things. We are deeply ingrained in the community. We have a strong emphasis of giving back to the community, and this is just a few of our organizations that we support in Richmond alone. Dozens more throughout the state in our efforts to support the communities in which we serve. So just quickly moving through some of this, in order to talk about 5G, what is different about 5G. People might think, well, what is 5G? It's the fifth generation of wireless technology. And, just quickly, the first generation was the inception of wireless technology, the cellular technology that first introduced voice. The second generation's introducing the capability of texting for the first time, in addition to voice from a cellular phone. The third generation brought network speed. So you had the first instance of browsing, basic email. That's when folks had their BlackBerries back in the day. And 4G was really when things became different on our phones. That is when you saw a high rate of data speeds, data transfer speeds that was possible on cellular technology. And that is really when we saw, one of the first instances of transformational change technology wise. You had, major companies like Uber, for example, that have their technology built on 4G networks, the use of their technology on 4G networks. And so that is really one of the big game changers, that came from 4G, and a lot of other examples. I mean, we're all tied to our phones, social media, online banking, web browsing, you name it. You can do it on your phone now, thanks to the way our network works and other networks work, as far as data rate speeds, and allowing that high level of data transfer. So what makes 5G different? 5G has a bunch of ways it's different than 4G, but I wanted to touch on these three real quick. So one of the major differences and the major drivers of new technology coming from 5G is latency. So latency is the time it takes for your signal, your data to travel from end user to end user. So the moment you click on that button, you're requesting data, you're going to a web page, you're receiving data from Facebook or whatever you're doing on your phone. It's the amount of time it takes for that signal to travel. What's different with 5G is the extra low latency times of less than 10 milliseconds end-to-end response times. That is a blink of an eye. That is real-time transfers of data that, I'll get into the next slide, make some really cool new technologies possible because of the real near-time speed. To put that in example, you're talking about maybe 40, 50 milliseconds on a 4G network, and maybe around that, maybe even slower on a traditional broadband network. Another major difference with 5G is the throughput. It's the amount of data that is able to be transferred over the network and what speed. So we're talking about, we've seen tests from the company, and you can go right now in Richmond where we have 5G small cells and pull down multiple gigabits speed if you do a speed test over our 5G network. And really the next big driver is the amount of volume of data that's able to be transferred over the network and the number of connected devices. So now we're talking about, in a stadium, high concentration of people, or in the city as people are moving around. You have more and more and more devices being connected to our network, especially as new technologies are emerging. And just a couple of those examples of new technologies emerging that are made possible by a 5G network. Just in the same vein of how we talked about how new technologies emerged from the inception of our 4G network, we're really just in the infancy stage. And it's really exciting to see some of the new things that are coming off of the possibilities of a 5G network. But we're only scratching the surface of the really, really neat technology that's going to be coming from 5G. Couple of those. This is actually a couple of things we've talked to the city with directly. Smart lighting solutions, intelligent traffic systems, using sensors that are connected to 5G to transfer a large amount of data to make systems more efficient. One of the easiest ones to explain, I put waste management on here. Imagine a trash can that has a 5G sensor on it that will relay information back to a centralized system that says, I'm full, come empty me. All of a sudden, you've now greatly increased the efficiency of trash routes, waste management routes within the city. So just some, simple real world examples. Another really cool one that I've seen is augmented visors from firefighters. So imagine, AR and VR technology that's, real time data allowing firefighters to see kind of, heat vision basically of, seeing, temperatures, being able to see through the smoke, being able to get real time data that makes their job safer. We've also seen multiple cities across the country institute 5G cameras throughout the city. And those have really increased public safety and increased public safety response time. So if you have an emergency and someone calls 911, we're able to, see on the scene what's exactly going on in real time. Another cool one that I've seen is, drones operating on 5G network, untethered from a main source. So all that data transfer again in real time, and the amount of data transferring in real time is only possible on a 5G network. So you're talking about, Amazon coming to deliver a package to your house with a drone. That's going to be made possible by a 5G network, just in the same vein as autonomous vehicles. That high level transfer of data in real time is made possible by this new technology. So I kind of went through the quick version of those couple of slides, but really starting to get into what our 5G build looks like in Richmond. So we really started the process in 2019, working on agreements with the city. We had to have several ordinances passed. James will get more into specifics there. So kind of started in 2019, but the bulk of the beginning of our build was in 2020, and that's when things really started to kick off. We have hundreds of nodes planned throughout the city, but in 2020, October of 2020, we hit a threshold, one of our internal metrics of percentage covered and node counts in the city to be able to announce Richmond as a 5G city. To date, really the only 5G cities that we've announced in Virginia are Richmond, Hampton Roads, and areas outside of DC and Northern Virginia. So it's kind of a exclusive crowd, small list of areas that we have this technology in, and are obviously looking to expand into other parts of the state as well.
Excuse me, Matt, it might be best if we advance to the final slide and talk a little bit about quickly the outreach tools, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure Sven has shared this website with all of you. I know it's been in your neighborhood newsletter. This is our website that is kind of a splash page catch-all for some basic information, basic frequently asked questions that you can go to, answer some basic questions. But if you do have more questions, you can click on the email us section, and rest assured that comes to a local team. That doesn't just get lost in the ether, or, some, team elsewhere in the country with our company. That is a local team that responds. And so you can obviously go through Sven, go through, a state legislator. We deal with, city councils and city council members and work closely with them to answer your questions. And, rest assured that's a local team. That's us that's working to be a resource to you. And with that, I will pass it over to you, James.
Great, thanks, Matt. If you could unshare, I'll reshare and put up my presentation here. Let's see, screen 2. So you should see a blue screen right now.
We don't see it quite yet.
Yeah, there you go. Yep, and then let's see. So you should see the first slide of my presentation, regulatory and legislative pathway.
We do.
Great, excellent. All right, move a few little things on my screen. All right, here we go. Well, first, I'd like to thank Councilmember Jordan for inviting us here. We're certainly excited to be here, grateful for the invitation. As Matt mentioned, my name is James Hoffman. I'm the Network Real Estate Manager for Verizon Wireless in Central Virginia and Hampton Roads. What that means is I work with localities to solidify our legal agreements, those that enable our build, work to make sure each of our sites is properly permitted, and then engage local communities in settings just like this one. Our entire ultra-wideband build acknowledges a shared desire across government, frankly, from the president to the FCC to the General Assembly and the city, that there's a compelling interest to deliver next generation experiences to citizens in Virginia and businesses, I should mention. And that's what we're committed to doing. Part of that is our responsibility to make sure citizens are informed about how we got to where we are today and have a better understanding of what's going on out in the right of way. So to that end, I'd like to share some information about the regulatory and legal framework that supports our build. Virginia was actually ahead of the federal government in setting out the conditions under which companies like Verizon can deploy small cells and 5G in the right of way. In 2017 and 2018, the General Assembly passed legislation that was the result of a negotiated compromise between local government and the wireless industry, and it does a number of things. It codifies limits on equipment size, on pole height. It establishes an administrative review process, which is critical, an administrative process for each site's local government permit approval. Generally, the overall approval process includes federal regulatory approval, review by the State Historic Preservation Office, and individual permitting by the city. Distinct for ultra-wideband sites in the right-of-way are that they are not subject to traditional zoning you may be familiar with, zoning that would apply to, say, a traditional 250-foot tall cell tower, a traditional macro tower, we call it. Again, that administrative process standardizes also fees and timelines, but it preserves a local government's right to deny applications for interference with, say, existing infrastructure, conflict with historic property protections, or planned redevelopment. It also prohibits a moratorium. So if a local government were to say, we don't want this particular site there, they would have to, say for aesthetic reasons, they would have to produce reasons for their denial and give us an opportunity to remediate whatever concerns they have and more closely match their expectations. In the second half of 2018, the Federal Communications Commission overlaid Virginia law with specific shot clocks for permit approval and declared that local government's aesthetic requirements had to be, quote, reasonable, non-discriminatory, objective, and disclosed to us in advance so we could be aware of them and meet their expectations. And then finally, over the course of 2019, I worked with the city, Verizon worked with the city and city council to pass an amendment to city ordinance, i.e. city code, giving the director of the Department Department of Public Utilities the authority to grant us the right to apply for attachment to city-owned existing poles, which is frankly why we've been able to deploy with such limited disruption to the community, because over 90% of our deployment is on existing City of Richmond infrastructure, where we are replacing existing poles and attaching our equipment. So I'll pause there and see if Matt has anything to add before I head on to our next slide and talk about implementation.
No, keep going, James. You're doing a great job.
All right. So as I mentioned, we've talked a little bit about the enabling law, and it begs the question, well, what does the process look like in Richmond? With utility poles and street lights in Richmond, again, an overwhelming percentage of our deployment, we begin by acquiring what we consider to be candidate approval from whoever owns the site. That could be Verizon Virginia, Verizon Telephone, the telephone company, Dominion Virginia Power, or the City of Richmond. This is the stage where a site would be rejected as a candidate because of, say, existing technology on a pole or redevelopment. It's not final approval. It's just, is this location an acceptable candidate for Verizon? Verizon Wireless then develops an architectural engineering package associated with the site. That site is reviewed for regulatory compliance. That includes the Federal Communications Commission, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and the State Historic Preservation Office, if applicable. You all may know that, of course, SHPO's part of the federal government started in the 1960s, and in Virginia, it's called the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. Its Eastern Division office, I believe, is on Kensington Avenue. And they're, of course, stewards of Virginia's archaeological, historical, and cultural resources. And they can and have rejected or made significant change requests to our sites in the past. So after we move through the regulatory process is when Verizon Wireless finally applies to the city DPU office for attachment. We'll apply for attachment, we'll receive our permit, and then we apply again to the Department of Public Works for a permit to access the right-of-way and do the work. So we move through regulatory, FCC, OSHA, SHPO if it applies, then we submit our permit to DPU, and then we submit another permit to DPW. And it's only after we've moved through that entire process and received approval to attach and approval to access the right-of-way that we have what we consider an approved site location. And once we're permitted, we then enter the construction phase. Matt, do you have anything to add before I move on to a little bit of construction?
You know, the only thing that I'll add here is, you know, just to reiterate the point that, you know, this is, you know, a multi-layered, you know, multifaceted process that we go through. There are a lot of sets of eyes on our applications and what our proposals are before we build. And, you know, we take very seriously the, you know, concerns of the community, especially the aesthetic nature. You know, which is, you know, on one of the previous slides that I had, you know, that 90% of our build is on existing structures, approximately 90% of our build throughout the city. And, you know, we do that in order to reduce the amount of new poles, reduce the amount of disruption and, you know, new things that are popping up on your street block. And that's why, you know, for example, the antennas at the top are brown, is to help them, you know, blend in a little bit better with the poles. And so, you know, I hope this demonstrates, as James is going through the process, you know, all the different, you know, like I said, the different layers that we go through and all the different approval processes and eyes that are on what we're doing.
Thank you, Matt. And just while we're on this slide, and I appreciate people putting questions in the chat, we'll work them in as it makes sense to this presentation. So when it comes to the approval part, the permitting part, what I'm hearing is that you're just working directly with DPW and DPU, that there really is no public engagement on where you do site selection anymore, or was there ever?
Not in the same way when there's a traditional zoning process. And that is a function of the legislation at the state level that established this administrative eligible review. where our sites can be approved by DPU and DPW by the city, that is entrusted with the right of way. Our sites can then be approved that way. So that's the real distinguishing factor.
I see. Okay. Sven, are there any chat questions that make sense at this point, or should we forge on?
Sure. I think when it comes to that siting and approvals process, really asks a pertinent question having to do with the overall strategy for how sites are selected, given that we do have streets in the fan where it would appear that there are sort of clusters of the antenna relays and some streets where there are none. And if you could speak to what might lead to that.
Sure. It generally has to do with our RF engineers take an overview of a particular location. Obviously, we want to serve as many people as we can. Particular with ultra wideband is our frequencies don't necessarily go as far as what you might be familiar with in terms of 4G and a traditional macro tower. So our replacement poles, our attachment to existing infrastructure, our sites have to be a bit closer together. So you might see a cluster of, say, 3 or 4 sites within 5 or 6 blocks. And where you're seeing them, say, in one area and not in another is most likely just because we're permitting a lot of sites and we're in the process of building and haven't gotten there yet.
Thanks, James. And just for ease of flow of this conversation, I think we're going to, by and large, try to hold the questions to the end. But we do appreciate them, and we are noting them as they come through in the chat.
Sounds great.
Yeah, thanks.
Sounds great. So we've talked a little about the permitting process. Let's talk about the construction process. So step one is, of course, on an existing, say, City of Richmond wood light pole. The pole owner would come out, remove and replace that pole at Verizon Wireless's cost. The poles are placed with a pole that's a little bit taller and a little bit wider, and that's for worker safety, obviously, because we're adding a little bit of weight to the pole. After the poles are placed, any existing power or communication lines are transferred from the original pole to the replacement pole, and Verizon Wireless attaches its small cell. After that, necessary fiber is run by Verizon Virginia, and necessary power is run from Dominion Virginia Power to the site. All that delivery is permitted, and it essentially makes each one of our ultra wideband sites in the right of way an individual cell site. After that takes place, our network assurance teams will optimize the site with a software package, and then the site goes into service. And that, from a permitting process and through construction is really soup to nuts. Matt, anything to add before I keep going?
Nope, nothing to add.
All right. So as we wrap up here, you likely have seen our sites in the right of way, but it might be beneficial to talk a little bit about what our site's component parts are and a little bit of the transition, or I should say evolution, of our site technology. So on the left, you will see one of our first ultra wideband sites in Scott's Addition. Scott's Addition was really ground zero, step one for our build in the city and in the 2nd District. So as you'll see on this particular site, down at the bottom, you may be able to see those arrows. Down at the very bottom is a disconnect box that allows us to turn the site on and off when work needs to be done. Right above that, a smaller box. This site, when this picture was taken, this site wasn't in service, but that is the power meter. And that little brown circle is where you'd have a glass covering, a plastic covering like the one you have on your house probably. Then if you go up the pole, you'll notice 3 antennas, each covering 120 degrees to make sure that we have significant coverage in that area. And what we've seen since we really began, when we really turned up deployment, particularly in the city of Richmond, after getting approval to attach to city structures at the end of 2019, as we moved from 2020 to 2021, our equipment has gotten a lot smaller. So what you'll see in this photo on the right is a site at 1501 Hanover Avenue, which is about 4 or 5 blocks from where I lived when I was growing up. on Hanover, you'll see that our radio heads have actually gotten about 30% smaller just in the span of, say, a year and a half. And that's something that is a win for us, and is really a win for everybody, to include residents. And it's something we're excited about. We hope and expect that to continue. And to the extent equipment becomes smaller and smaller, we'll be replacing this existing equipment, and it will become a bit smaller and a bit less noticeable. And that's something that's really good. So we really appreciate the opportunity to present today. And I don't know if Matt has any closing thoughts, but I guess we can move into questions.
Yeah, I think everybody's eager to ask questions, so we will. Why don't we go ahead and move into Q&A?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and start with the ones we've received in the chat in order of their submittal. So Rad asks, are there any means for residents to protest the location of the infrastructure you're installing? I think we touched on this a little bit earlier as far as the public engagement component. For instance, if a pole located directly in front of my home or is in the middle of the block is chosen versus a pole on a corner, can I request another location to be considered?
So we can certainly have those conversations offline, and we can take a look at where we are in the process. So we're always open to feedback, and if there is a particular site or a particular situation that's particularly difficult, we can have that conversation and take a look.
And James and Matt, just a quick follow up on that. I know you guys had referenced the Know Your Wireless page. There's also an email associated with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I touched on that earlier. The email it goes directly to a local team here in Richmond. So like I said before, it's not going to just land in some unknown inbox where it's not going to get responded to. It is our team that receives that information, and we respond to those promptly.
Well, you guys must organize your inbox better than I do. But or James could drop that in the chat. That would be really helpful as well if you're able to do that.
And just to stay on the question for a moment,
Sure.
to make sure that we're setting expectations, because I know this, this question that was just asked for that address was one that we forwarded to you as a request. And I mean, under what circumstances do you locate the infrastructure somewhere else?
It doesn't happen very often, and it also depends on how far we are along in the construction process in terms of, is it just in candidate selection, right? That very first stage I talked about, or are we permitted and or are we permitted and in construction? So again, it's really site by site.
And for a historic neighborhood like the Fan, I mean, is there opportunity to work together on citing these things? And you're never going to make everyone happy. That's absolutely impossible. And I think we all appreciate our technology and understand that things advance and it requires hard infrastructure, but this is a historic neighborhood. I do think, these boxes they just look odd. I mean, there's no other way to put it, with the vacuum cleaner like tubing. And I don't know if that is also getting smaller, but it is something that really stands out in our neighborhood. And to the extent that you could work collaboratively to locate them in areas, I know alleys, people asked about alleys as an option, but where are you specifically when it comes to the Fan on the process of citing and permitting these poles? Thank you.
Sure. So we are, our plan extends through 2022, but we have permitted a great number of our overall build plan. So we expect to continue to build through this calendar year, at least in the right of way. And Matt may have a comment on alleys. And I know that was one of your questions at one point, Matt.
Yeah, so it's a different part of the company. It's our RF engineers, our radio frequency engineers that really, go through a process to select where is the best priority spot for the best coverage, taking other things into consideration. A lot of the times in a back alley, first off, the coverage isn't going to go as far. There are going to be more obstructions. It's not as, an open of an area. And also, a lot of the times, the poles in back alleys are already very full with other equipment. And that is, as James pointed out, kind of the first process is we work with, part of our company, Verizon Telephone, and with Dominion Virginia Power in that site selection process to determine, is this pole even a candidate? Because sometimes Dominion Virginia Power will come back to us and go, hey, we've got a big transformer at the top of the pole. This is not a good candidate, and we have to move on to another site potentially to try to make the coverage in that area work. So typically in an alley is not optimal from both of those regards, as far as coverage and as far as trying to find a pole that isn't already has too many lines and too much other equipment that would prohibit us from building on that pole.
Thanks, Matt. And moving back to some of the chat, Tanya asks about potential health impacts from 5G and asks whether those adverse impacts are monitored by Verizon.
Absolutely. So the FCC sets a very strict level of guidance and standards as far as RF concerns. There are strict safety standards that we far exceed, and other companies have to follow and exceed as well when we are deploying our technology. And so, yes, all of those standards and guidelines and rules that we have to follow when it comes to RF health and safety are backed by science. They're backed by studies, and we follow those guidelines to a T. And we go through that process in the construction phase to make sure that we're meeting all of those safety standards.
And James, I don't know if you want to expand on that at all either, but I mean, just to put a point on it, has there been any observable health impact from the build out of 5G?
No, and I think Matt really said it well. This is a well-studied technology, and organizations around the world have stood in support.
Yeah, whether it's the WHO, the FDA, there are numerous studies and safety standards that all point to one direction, and that is there is no credible study that shows that there's a direct health impact, and those safety standards that are backed by science, like I said, we follow to a T. So that is something that we always follow.
Great, thank you. Jim asks, and I think this was touched on, but specifically, is there a network approval process for deployment, or is it done individually site by site?
James, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, it's done site by site. I mean, for every single location we have in the city, we go through the process that James outlined. We go through individually, site by site, for every location. So DPU, DPW, SHPO, when we're working with DVP, Dominion Power, and all of those different levels, that is on an individual site by site basis. Our engineering plans are all with one individual site. All the maps, all the drawings, the process that we go through, it's all individualized by site.
That's accurate. And of course, our RF engineers certainly have an understanding of where they want to go and how they build the network. But generally, we start in densely populated areas and move out as makes sense. But Matt hit it well.
Okay. And Jim has his hand raised, and Jim asked that prior question. So I'm going to ask him to unmute to follow up as well.
Yeah, I guess more specifically, is there a desired RF coverage map that you all are trying to ascertain? Because if you're doing a site-by-site approval process, it's hard for us to understand what that desirable coverage looks like that you keep speaking about, especially if we're wanting to petition to put these in the alleys or on different poles. So is that something that you're able to provide information or shed light on?
So
Matt,
are you asking?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so let me just make sure I understand your question, Jim. So are you asking for kind of what our coverage maps look like and what our plans are, what they look like?
Yeah, I guess the plans are obviously trying to help you accomplish a specific amount of coverage and frequency and whatever all the RF stuff is that you all need to be able to do in the background. So I guess just getting a better understanding for what that looks like at like a block by block level, a house by house level, what leads to the decisions as to where they go and what are the implications since you're only doing these a pole by pole approval process, what it ends up looking like.
Yeah, James, I see. I don't know if there's anything more than what I'm about to say, but unfortunately, we do get questions like that from time to time of coverage maps and what our desired plans look like. Unfortunately, that's all proprietary information, so we're not allowed. Um, you know, I wouldn't be allowed to go get a map and show you as far as what our coverage maps look like and what our desired RF goals are. That's all a proprietary process within the company.
And that's not something we can say that, on a block by block basis that they're willing to forego or to sacrifice. Like what would be that the recourse as citizens in the area?
Are you talking about asking for like a relocation of a certain
Yeah,
site?
I guess to allude to other questions that have been asked, if we do not want one of the poles within 50 feet of the front door of our house to be used, how do we understand what is amicable when making those recommendations if we do this in a collaborative manner?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, really no different answer than what James alluded to earlier is that we're happy to look at those on a site by site basis. We'd have to go back to our engineers and, we have a pretty large team that we work with as far as, RF engineers and other folks on the wireless team that when we do get questions like that, we send it to them to evaluate and see, what's possible there. So I can't really answer you on a more large scale. It would have to be evaluated on an individual basis.
Okay.
And I will add to your question, of course, there are, when we deploy infrastructure and our coverage map changes, there are publicly available documents, maps in terms of where our sites are, well, I should say the area we're covering now and what type of experience you can expect. So once we've deployed and we have sites in service, that information in terms of coverage is available.
And James, I just dropped the Verizon coverage map in the chat as well, if folks are curious. Julie asks two related questions specific again to the FAN. Is the 5G process completed in the FAN? And if not, can you shed any light on future planned sites within the FAN boundaries?
So we, as I mentioned, we have a plan in terms of ultra wideband. So it's our ultra wideband sites that live in the right of way. We have a plan for 2022. I would say, a great number of our sites have been permitted, but we still have a number of sites that are in permitting. So about all I can say is that we've got a plan for 2022, but frankly, a lot of what we've wanted to accomplish has at least been submitted for permitting. So we're executing that plan and moving towards the back half of 2022.
Eric asks, can you confirm that these towers are what is enabling houses to get 5G internet service? And if so, is there any information for when an address or street block will be turned on for that service?
Matt, do you want to talk about 5G home and maybe Baltimore, or do you want?
Yeah, 5G home is a product and it's going to be always a little bit different in our traditional territory where we have FiOS. So we're deploying 5G home in a different way. 5G home, as I'm sure some of you've seen, has been more readily available in other parts of the country where we don't have FiOS. We really only have FiOS in our traditional East Coast footprint, our ILEC, our telephone territory footprint. So I don't know if there's a date. I've not seen a date within the company or illusion of when 5G home is going to be coming to Richmond. I'm sure there will be plans in the future for 5G home and 5G business services. As of right now, I think we're still working that out as far as how that's going to work in our territory where we already have FiOS.
All right, thank you. Becca asks about a specific inquiry at West and Burke, where one of the already installed boxes has been hit by trucks turning and removed, but the antennas at the top remain. Can you speak to whether that site is being reevaluated, or would that be?
That would be something to best follow up with offline. We would have to look into that individual site, and we can, we can look into that and touch base offline.
Okay. And then Becca follows up with a follow-up question about the aesthetic issues related to the installations and the height of the power disconnect boxes. Is there any leeway as to how high those are placed so that they can be placed at a less visible level?
I don't, James, correct me. I mean, you know better than I do. Those are all prescribed normally by Dominion and, standards we have to follow as far as electrical engineering, right?
That's right. So to start, it's not a small cell if it is over 50 feet tall, and that's part of the state legislation that was passed that I mentioned in my presentation. So the height limit is 50 feet. And in terms of where we end up with respect to height, it's a delicate balance between our RF objectives, so delivering service, and Dominion Virginia Power's requirements around, say, distance from power lines. So that is essentially what happens. Our RF engineers and Dominion work together to figure out an acceptable height, because certainly they would have to approve it if we have transmission lines.
Understood. Thank you. Liz asks, will other cellular providers, to your knowledge, be installing similar ultra wideband equipment on adjacent poles? Are you aware of any other parallel plans like that?
The short answer is yes. We're not the only company that is building small cells all over the country, but specifically in Richmond. We're not the only company, and I can't speak for other companies, but I think a lot of the ones you're probably going to see are very, similar to ours in looks, and also similar, co-locations on existing structures.
Would there, just to follow up on that question, would there be an instance where the same pole would retain sort of technology, or would those have to be cited separately, to your knowledge?
We normally cite separately, James.
So we have sites, for instance, where we have 4G and 5G technology, and those technologies are permitted. You may be asking about, and I guess I should ask you, are you asking about whether multiple carriers, so multiple providers, could be on the same pole?
That is my question. You put it better than I did, but that's my question. So
that's an interesting question, and that is actually was an explicit part of a piece of the legislation passed at the General Assembly, that one of the denial provisions that local government has is for too many small cell sites in one specific location. And how that would manifest is potentially multiple carriers on a pole, because one of the things the General Assembly wanted to avoid, and one of the things I know local governments want to avoid, is this kind of monstrosity pole with a number of carriers on one pole that really benefits no one in the long run.
Okay, thank you. And we received a couple of questions that kind of allude to, as you move through that permitting process with the city, which you alluded to is still in process for a number of the locations in the fan area. Is that a public process in the sense that that permit application, and as it works its way through the department, is that a publicly accessible document, or is that also proprietary at that stage?
So you might, in terms of the granularities of your question, you might have to ask DPU or DPW. But of course, our permit applications, once they're submitted, just like anything that's submitted to a local government, when we permit sites, they are entrusted to the local government. So I suspect, I suspect that DPU or DPW would have to answer that question.
Okay, thanks. Catherine, are you seeing some other questions as well?
Well, there was a follow-up to the height question. We definitely had complaints about the height of the poles themselves, but the question was really intended on the height of the box and the tubing, why it had to be where it was, and is there any opportunity to move up or down so it's not right in the sight line the way it is? Thank you.
And that's all, I appreciate the question. And that is all driven by RF, assuming we're able to agree on a particular height with respect to safety. That's an RF decision around what's going to optimize coverage. So we're getting the most out of each one of our sites.
I think the question was more geared towards the power boxes and the cutoffs at the bottom of the pole. Correct me if I'm wrong, James, that is electrical engineering guidelines and DVP that more dictate that, correct?
That's correct. I'm sorry if I misunderstood. But yes, that's correct. They have very specific instructions around when we deliver power to a site and they establish a meter and a disconnect box. There are very specific rules and regulations around where exactly they're located.
And so, I mean, are there like any opportunities to put higher or lower, whether it's oriented towards the house, towards the street?
I am going to say that I don't think we've made changes because the rules are so specific. But if there's a specific location, again, it's another opportunity to have a conversation about it.
Okay, and then there was a question sent earlier on. You will be coming back to take down other poles, correct?
Yes. Yeah. If we do a pole replacement and replace a location with a new pole for, a taller or a thicker pole, yes, we remove the old pole.
Okay.
Just in the same way, if, Verizon Telephone, Verizon Telephone owns a lot of the poles in the city. Just in the same way, if, poles age and we go through inspection processes to, if that pole needs to be replaced for some reason, we always remove the old pole. Now, you may not see it be removed that same day. It may be a crew that comes the next day to remove it. But yes, the intention is to remove the old pole.
Okay, and technology does shift quickly. At some point, 5G is going to be the equivalent of 1G. I mean, are you guys bound to come remove this infrastructure once it's no longer the latest and greatest and no longer, active? Or if there's smaller versions available?
Well, and I think that's an excellent question. And certainly we can't future-proof everything, but that is how technology evolves. And you saw in my example from Scott's Addition in 2019, really 2020, and Hanover Avenue, I think it was the 1500 block. That is an example of the evolution of the technology, where we had one vendor that had a particular antenna that was one size, and we had an opportunity to downsize our equipment because it had evolved, and we did that. And that's something that is going to continue. And when the equipment evolves, gets smaller, again, we think that's a win for everyone. So we'll be out there and making that transition.
Okay, so you basically now own these poles, or you have the right and permitting to these poles, and they will probably always be an option for you guys to have your infrastructure on it, whether it's 5G or it's 6G or whatever it is in the future. There's likely to be some sort of small cell technology at these locations.
I'd say that's a fair assessment, but of course, anything new that were to go on those sites, anything that deviated from our field construction drawings and all the detail that we submit to the city would have to be updated. So anything new would have to be re-permitted unless it was just regular maintenance.
And related to that question, Charlie follows up with, have Scott's Addition's equipment been downsized yet, given the smaller available options at this stage?
You know what? I have to take a look. I don't know if that particular site has been transitioned, but that is our goal, and we're in the process of doing that everywhere, frankly.
Okay, and while we're still discussing, and I said 45 minutes at the outset, that was really optimistic. Obviously, we want everyone to get their questions answered. Can we pull up the screen again that has the information for people to reach out with their specific questions? And, please, Matt, James, put the phone numbers and emails that they should be using. When they want to ask a question about a pole coming in front of their house, if they feel like they're experiencing adverse effects of 5G. Health concerns, we want to take that seriously and make sure that they know what their actions are if they feel like they are being affected by 5G. And I believe there are a few more questions in the chat. I will bring up one that we got directly via email. The neighbor felt that the sidewalk repair afterwards, left the sidewalk looking much worse and was not done appropriately. And I believe the reply we got from you guys at the time was that the city had fixed the sidewalk afterwards. But if within the code, it says Verizon is supposed to replace it to same or better, how is that still not your responsibility to make sure you're repairing the sidewalk to same or better? Thank you. Even if you've subcontracted it out or let the city do it.
Yeah, so I'll take that one real quick. So, of course, that is our goal, to make it, as good or better. And so if there's an instance where it's not, please get in contact with me, and I'll get in touch with, our colleagues that work within the city to address that concern.
And what would that look like practically?
Practically, let's say, the sidewalk wasn't, put back to where it needed to be. I dealt with an issue in, I can't remember what county it was, but we were, I think we were laying fiber and across the right of way. And a lot of people, may not realize that a lot of the times your property and the right of way are the same. And so the person's driveway, we cut across their driveway to put fiber, and our contractor that redid that portion of the person's driveway, they messed up, and it was not back to where it used to be. They contacted me, I contacted our engineers and our technicians in the area, and we made it right. We had somebody go back out there and fix the driveway. And so if there's an instant like that, get in contact with me. And I'll get in touch with the right person in the company, and we'll do our best to make it right.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to echo that, we take our responsibilities very seriously, and if something's not up to standard, something's not made whole, then we'll fix it. Full stop.
And I do want to give both James and Matt credit on that particular instance. I believe that it was determined that the city had actually replaced a pole and then had not work to patch the sidewalk. But there was quick follow-up on that issue, and we do appreciate the outreach. If there is an issue like that, 311 is always your best friend as well. And we will be happy to follow up on those requests. Charlie follows up with, do you know if you plan to expand this coverage along Monument Avenue or for future tower placement there?
Correct me if I'm wrong, James. I don't think we have any plans at the moment along Monument Avenue. Is that correct?
No sites there now, no current plans.
Okay.
Well, that was an easy one. Okay.
Yeah.
If anybody
we are from Richmond, so we did talk about that before this call.
Yeah, we don't have to orient you to the streetscape. If anybody has any additional questions at this time, also feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you as well. And again, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared back out with meeting participants and with our local civic associations to be shared with folks that weren't able to make it. And actually, Matt and James, do you know, is the presentation that y'all gave that spoke to the regulatory process and background, is that going to be available as well?
Yeah, we can email it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, looks like we have, this is a good chat comment to end on from Charlie. Thank you to Matt and James. Tough position to be in, and appreciate your candor. Julie says, thank you for joining us. And yes, thank you so much. We all love our devices. We love our technology. It's just the dealing with the infrastructure right in front of your house is something that we take personally. This is our home, this is our neighborhood. And appreciate you spending time with us this evening to answer these questions and continue to be available when homeowners and renters and community members have questions about what's happening. And Tim, I know the Fan District Association has been a great partner in communicating this out. Obviously, not always get the comments and answers that we are hoping for, but we really would like to be collaborative partners with you so that we are finding the best locations possible to avoid, some of this conflict and friction. And we'll remain hopeful that your future products maybe continue to get smaller and smaller, and that the health concerns are not something that materialize. But Matt, James, again, thank you for being here. Tim, anyone have final comments? And Sven, thank you. You always set up meetings so beautifully and are great at moderating. So thank you for pulling everyone together, Sven.
Yes, thank you all.
I think that's a great note to end on. I like to end on a note of confidence. Thanks everybody for joining. And yeah, James, did you want to say something? Sorry.
No, it's our pleasure. And I will say, I know Matt mentioned it, but the website and particularly that email address, this isn't an email address of some nameless, faceless company that you submit a comment to and it goes into a black hole and you never hear about it again. That finds its way to the appropriate people within days, and you will get a response.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all, that helped organize this. And, we appreciate the questions. We understand the concern, like we live in Richmond too. And, we're here to be a resource to Sven and Counselor Jordan and to all of you. So if we'll do our best to get through everybody's questions that we didn't get to. And if you have any more, just let us know.
Awesome.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.